Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are across the world. I'm happy here to announce or open our first seminar of the project called Innovation for Active and Healthy Aging. And the main issue we are trying to solve this problem with this project is the problem how to get innovation to the elderly age groups across Europe. So today we are going to discuss how to involve end users to this process, because it's not a big secret that this is one of the main objectives to get innovation to the end users if end users do not accept this novel solution that we are proposing. So yeah, today the topic is how to unlock potential of stakeholders in active and healthy aging participatory design process. And today we have prepared two quite different geographically and also topic-wise presentations. One is from Estonia, Helen Kokk, and the other one is from the United States, from across the world. And Robert Schulz is going to discuss also how to involve end users from his perspective. Few commercial announcements before we start. You can find us in social media. Also, our webpage is open already. So please find us and get involved in our activities. We have also launched an open call for cross-border testing. So don't miss this opportunity. Contact me or you can find our general email to get involved. And also, if you want to ask any questions from the presenters or from the project, then please use this opportunity. Under the link of the event, you can find our question and answers will be online, but you can drop your questions there. So, but I guess that we are ready. So Helen, the stage is yours, and Helen is a service designer. So you should know better than me how to involve end users to this process.
Yes, thank you for having me. So let's give it a couple of seconds until I see my material. Alrighty, so just to make sure I have everything here. So, as I said, thank you for having me. And I'm going to take a really practical angle to this topic. So basically giving a few tools and hints and case studies, what to follow. So I'm going to make a couple of breaks as well, where I'm going to ask a few questions, so you can really feel, like really get into the topic itself. And as given, we're going to talk about stakeholder engagement. And I'm going to talk about it from two sides, actually. But before I do that, a little bit about myself, because I've been told it would be kind to introduce myself where I'm coming from. So as mentioned before, my name is Helen, originally from Estonia, and these days you can call me anything from service design specialist to UX to user interface, you name it. And most of my day actually looks like this. So it's a collection of multiple tools that I use. So name it from design sprints to end user mapping to persona mapping to empathy canvases, all of those things. So I do a lot of process mapping. But the actual background where I come from is coming from a really heavy design background. So most of the works that I actually do wraps up with this neat little bow, which is user interface or graphic design, if you will. So here is just an example of a landing page, long back when, and an application, right? So basically you can, I like to call myself a multidisciplinary service design anything in that sense. Now let's get to the good part. So I have over time, so basically when I have talked about these topics or when I have worked with various clients, then the question is, like when to do this stakeholder engagement or talk with your end users or to do idea mapping or all of those things. So here's a simple formula how this could be done. So it's a set of questions we can ask ourselves. And if you ask a question, you can either follow the yes or the no. So let's take the first kind of question here on the map. So I need to step a little bit closer to the screen. So do you know clearly what your team is working towards? So if it's a no, then you can go and follow the service design tools that go under the keyword of goal setting. And if it's a yes, you take that other question and follow the same structure. So I'm not going to go through all these questions, but this is a kind of like cheat sheet, if you will, like just follow the questions and try to see like what kind of service design approach you could take. And here, as I promised, everything is super practical, what I'm going to give you. So there's a website called product.club. So if you go to that website and just type in goal setting, it gives you multiple tools to use to go over this question. Now let's get to the good part, so the stakeholder engagement. So the number one thing that we tend to forget and that we don't, like necessarily our minds don't go there, is creating empathy with the real users. So let's take a little bit of time here, because this is like literally one of the first core things or foundations when building a service or building a product. So if I show you this guy here, right? So let's a little bit do this mental exercise. So do we know where this guy is coming from? Like, do we know where he lives? Does he look American? Does he look somebody who comes from Europe? How old he might be? Does he have cats and dogs? So just a few questions that we could ask from ourselves. And the same goes with this lovely lady here. So really think, like, does she have kids? Where does she live? Does she use an iPhone or Android or iOS? So I would be really surprised if some of you would actually know these people, because these are two stock images I got from iStock Photos. So even me personally, I don't know these people. So the number one lesson that we have to learn here is that we cannot judge the book by its cover. Like, we cannot presume what the other person is thinking, right? So even if we think that we know our end users, if you haven't had a real conversation with them, you actually don't know your end users. And so the same thing goes to mental models. So if I would kindly ask you to take a few seconds to think about the first red car that comes to your mind. So usually what people think about is the red Ferrari, the famous red Ferrari. So because the brand is that strong, like red car, obviously associated with red Ferrari. It might be that some of you think about another kind of red car. It usually comes from the fact that you have experience with some sort of other red car. Either you own a red car, your friend has a red car, or you just saw a red car this like couple of hours ago, let's say. So again, we cannot presume what the other person is thinking, because let's say that in this case, I was thinking about a toy car even, so not actually a car that you can drive. So even if we can kind of like map down where our end users live, let's say they live in south of Europe or they live in the States somewhere, then we still cannot know what they're thinking. So it still boils down to the fact that we need to have a real conversation with them. And here's a nice little case study from a very famous service called Airbnb. So for those who don't know Airbnb, so Airbnb's business model is that you can rent the place and then people can come and they can stay there. So one of the crucial things that Airbnb learned is that they skipped the stakeholder engagement. And as soon as they launched their first platform, their first MVP, the first minimum viable product, they let the people of the platform upload the photos of the apartments and places themselves. And what happened was that And what happened was that the business side saw that there's not a lot of traction in the background. So there was like about 100 users, putting up their listings, and then people using those 100, but it didn't scale up, it was just flatlining. And when one of the business side people actually thought that, okay, let me be the end user of my own platform. And then what they discovered was the fact that most of the listings, most of the photos that people had uploaded looked like this. So they didn't actually look inviting. And as soon as he did that, so basically what he discovered was a very simple thing. He went to the store and bought a good mirror camera and actually made good quality photos of the places, and then the platform took off. So how important it is to do actually this stakeholder engagement from that side. And again, I'm keeping to my promise. So here is a very practical tool that you can use for that. So it's called an empathy map. And how an empathy map works is that you put your actual real end user in the middle of this. And then you would draw 2 lines, one vertically, the other one horizontally. And you would map down what they say, what they do, what they feel, and what they think. And with this, you actually get a better overview of what are the actual pain points, what are they thinking in this moment of time. But I need to illustrate one more thing about end users. So to illustrate this point, I have a good example here, which I also learned through one of my own first case studies. So let's explain it through a cat. So imagine you having a cat as a pet in your house. So one of the core things of having any kind of animal is that they need food to live, right? So imagine yourself now going to your nearby store and buying food for the cat. So what are your criteria? So you might choose the food based on the price, based on the quality, based on the brand that is familiar, or based that somebody suggested you that brand. Now, you buy that food, you're happy with the quality, you're happy with the price and everything. You go home and you give the food for your cat, but the cat is, yeah, I will not eat that. So would you go back to the store to buy the same food? You would not, right? So the important thing here to understand is that end users are connected to other end users. So there's actually, when you have your end user, they might be influenced by somebody else in the background. So there's a really, really clever way how to kind of map that down as well for yourself. And I mentioned that I learned this through a case study of my own. So what happened there is that we were building a solution that was meant for Java developers. And clearly, the end user of the product were Java developers sitting somewhere in the office, going through lines of code and trying to make their own products better. And the product was doing okay. It had about 300,000 something users. But the problem with that was that the business side was weak because those Java developers working in some sort of corporation weren't willing to pay for the product. And back in the day, I got the simple task to make it more modern, the website itself. And obviously, you make it minimal, you add a little bit more white space. Aesthetically, it looks better than the old version, right? And what happened was that the end users started to drift away because the company thought that now, since it's more modern, we can ask more money for it. But the people working in the corporations were still not willing to pay for it. But a little bit time passed, and what happened was that the supervisor of these developers actually started to pay for the service, yet although they themselves are not the end users of the product itself. So really, if you work with your services, with your products, really try to see if it's influenced by somebody else. So it might be a couple relationship, right? A product might be meant for, let's say, women, but the man actually in the background is making the decision. It might be a group of friends. It might be supervisors, employees, as I mentioned. It can be anything. And the trick here is to take the same empathy map that I showed before, But now, draw a circle around that and try to see and ask from these end users, like if there's somebody else working in the background, and try to fill in for those end users as well, what they think, what they feel, what they say, what they do. So to wrap up this point of really creating empathy with the end users, like really think about that. So let's imagine that today we would remove all the humans in the world. Like, would anything around us would make sense? Would somebody use a chair? Would somebody use a light? So in the center of everything, literally, there's a human being. Like if you can see beyond, like technical solutions and things like that, everything is used by humans. So basically, like really try to go to the needs, the pain points, the thinking processes of the real people. So that's the bottom line, like when we're having a chat, like really try to show that somebody somewhere exists. And if we go on with this topic, so people have journeys, right? So they have stories. So a lot of things happen to us during the day, right? So it's great that now we know that a real user somewhere exists, but what can we do? How can we kind of like get closer to their stories? Like how can we see what their everyday looks like, what their every week looks like? So the good practical tool here is a tool literally called Customer Journey Map. And the customer journey map looks like this. So in essence, what is actually happening here is like, let's take the layers. So the first layer would be actions. What are the actual steps of the real person using a product? So let's imagine that a person wakes up. That's step number one. That's action number one. The person grabs their phone, checks messages. That's action number two, etc., etc., etc. And with those actions, so each of the actions has always a positive emotion and a negative emotion. Not always, sorry, but like still, like if you go by the layers, you might feel like you could map down, like, is that action leaning towards more positive, impactful thing, or is it leaning more towards like a negative problem, issue, some sort of like thing? And then if you take those like bottom two layers, so the fuchsia pink and the green, so for the fuchsia pink, you would map down actual problems. And for the green, you might map down opportunities. So how can you revert that negative emotion or negative action into your business opportunity or something that really helps the end user behind there? And let me show you an actual case study how to work with these customer journey maps. So here's just a random example of Sophie. She's a small kid still, but she has the story where she needs to go through a MRI machine in a hospital. And in this case, her actions are listed down with these green sticky notes. And on top, we have emotions, questions that Sophie is asking of herself. And underneath, we have two layers. So if you remember what I was saying about the real users, so in this case, we have people who Sophie is interacting with in each of those action steps, in each of those points. And then later on, those side characters, so the cats in the background, if you will. And how you can work with a customer journey map, besides the fact that each of those columns shows you a problem or an opportunity, what you can do either alone yourself or with your team is actually give votes to the points where you feel that most opportunity lies. So in this case, what the team did was that they found that will it hurt me question is the most powerful one, the most confusing one. So how can we revert this into something positive? So how can we revert this to something that has an impact? And literally the answer sits in front of your eyes. So how you work with this is that you can draw a line. Will it hurt me? So something needs to change, either with the nurse or either with the MRI machine. So you don't go and change something with the with the doctor's office visit, or you wouldn't change anything in the registry. You would literally do something with the nurse or the MRI machine. So through series of like ideation workshops, if you remember those questions that I asked all the way in the beginning, so this product.club actually has tons of methods how to do good ideation session. And through a series of like these ideation workshops, what happened was that this MRI machine was taken into focus because the human criteria of a nurse has too many variables. So it was easier to change something up with the MRI machine. So what they did in this case was that the fact that they made it as a camping experience. So Sophie goes to take a hike. So they glued like stickers on the walls and on the ground, like a grass and everything. And if you go back to the customer journey map, what happens now is that the same solution can be implemented much more before. So for example, the doctor could already say to Sophie, soon you'll go camping. In the registry, they can give some sort of like small, I don't know, token, you know, like this is for your hike, you know. So kind of really make it as one seamless story for Sophie, so she wouldn't have this negative experience in that one point. And here, a really good case study as well, how a pharmacy in Finland used the same principles, real people, real stories, customer journey mapping, and managed to get their business. I think the revenue raised like 3 times or something during like 1 quarter, so it was quite crazy. And what happened was that, again, I'm not telling you the answer straight up, but a little bit mental exercise. Let's go through it. So who are the end users of pharmacy? That's a tricky question, right? Because everybody can use a pharmacy. But let's boil it down. So, okay, everybody can go to pharmacy, but when do you go to pharmacy? Like, what are your needs? Why do you go there? It's not just being sick. Believe me, like there's tons of other stories why we go to pharmacies. So it might be that you're looking for nature's products, you're maybe looking for vitamins, maybe you're looking for something else. So if I would take like the people sitting in this room, I would get at least like 7 different stories, right? So what they did was that they talked with various people to get down, you know, like their stories as a customer journey map. And one of the interesting things that they discovered there was that when they were talking with elderly people, so it's not about being sick actually for them, it's one of the social activities, let's put it this way. So they wake up and they go to the pharmacy and they actually expect a human relationship there. So they actually expect that somebody in a pharmacy comes to them and provides them consultation because they want their health to get better. So it's not just getting the product itself, you know, the pills or whatever. It's the welcomeness, the kind of like the help that they expect there. And this pharmacy particularly trained their what you call like the people who work in the pharmacies to like really pay attention to the social aspect. Like ask like, how are you feeling today? Like, do you have blood pressure issues or something like that, really making it a social experience. And that's why, of course, because like emotionally they got more help in those particular brands of pharmacies, that pharmacy was preferred in that particular focus group. So again, you know, like the stories, the simple things in life, you know, like stakeholder engagement. And one other story that I really, really love is a story of a spa. So again, a simple thing that, especially with like this very vivid picture of startups that we have, we tend to jump immediately to solutions. Like I know what the solution needs to be. So in the case of the spa, the issue was that their users, their customers, started to go down. So they had much less visitors as they had at one point. And they jumped to the gun. So basically what they presumed was like, oh my God, the interior is not modern enough, you know, like, so let's like modernize this. Let's buy new furniture, let's paint the walls, let's make new flooring, and et cetera, et cetera. But the visitors didn't come back. So basically they invested a lot of money to do something, but they didn't get the effect that they wanted. And when they used simple techniques of real people talking with your customers and customer journey mapping, what they actually discovered was that one of the focus groups, one of the end users, one of the stakeholders of their spas were actually people who came there to do their exercise and then relax in the sauna. But the problem in their customer journey map, in their stories, was the fact that the bus station was removed, which didn't allow them to go to the spa so easily. So it wasn't anything to do with the spa. So it was literally logistics. So again, how important it is to just have a normal conversation with actual humans and asking about their stories. And the same goes here, you know, like I have so many of these stories, you know, like, but it always works, you know, like, again, now you know the trick, you know. So again, like if I would give you a mental exercise to think about, like if you would offer a service design for a flooring company, the main question is not about the portfolio or how good the website looks or what the prices are. Sorry, not what the prices are, but what the team looks like. But the question what people want is like how much it's going to cost me. And one of the case studies from my own showreel is this website where we put this huge calculator to calculate the price of a flooring. And the unexpected effect for the business was that every single competitor in Estonian market sent their end customers to calculate the price on this particular website. So you see, you know, like this wasn't anticipated, this wasn't designed, this wasn't the KPI, but good things happen if you just go back to the basics. And just a really fun thing here, you know, like again, another side of the coin, you know, like now you have seen like multiple angles how to take, you know. So basically, again, how simple stories and how to provide solutions on top of that. So there was a guy living in UK and who listened to people sitting in pubs. And what he listened into was that people complaining like, oh, I need to go home to feed my cat again, to walk with my dog, and blah, 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 you know. But people want to own pets, right? So he listened to the stories of the real people and came up with the solution. So what if you would take a pet and you would skip all the going out, all giving food, all of those things, and you would sell rocks as pets? And he made millions of dollars basically with the simple idea, because people wanted to own the concept of a pet but didn't actually want to own a pet. So you can Google about this story in Wikipedia. It's called Pet Rock, and it's a really good case study to. It's a fun one, you know, like how listening to real users and their stories, and then coming up with a very simple solution, you know, in the end of the day. So common mistakes that personally I hear a lot whilst I'm listening to various stories and working with companies and partners and etc. We are all sure we know what people want. So name it be from the business side, from the end customer side. So if you cannot show that you have actually spoken with somebody, we don't know what the person actually wants by the end of the day. And we tend to forget what was our goal. So it's not just having the conversation, but it's keeping in mind also, you know, like, so what's the point of this conversation? What's the goal? Like, what do I want to get out of this conversation? And very last thing is we tend to forget to measure the KPIs. So how can we say after 3 months that yes, the customer experience went better? So basically, if you have the real users, if you have the goal, and if you set the KPIs, then you have full-on validation and certainty that this is something that makes sense in all angles of the topic at hand. And for those who know this company, like a really famous Estonian company, a startup called TransferWise, nowadays called Wise, they actually mapped down in a pretty nice graph, at least in my eyes, like what does it mean to include real goals, KPIs, and real users all the way in the beginning. So think of this: if you take the horizon of time in this horizontal flow, right? So if you're sure, let's say that we have 1 week, right? So if I make sure today, what do I exactly need to do? and the time passes, I'm investing time and money inside of like building the solution, then the risk also goes down, right? So the cost goes down over time and the risk goes over time. So it just makes sense, you know, to do the basic things as soon as possible. So here is this golden statement, you know. The earlier we do user testing, the less it will cost to fix problems later. And what I can say also here is that everybody here can think, you know, like, I'm pretty sure that at least once in our lives we have thought, you know, like, how poor experience, like how bad is this experience? So latest reports say that with over 50% of products or services being developed actually don't include end users. So they're done somewhere in the laboratory presuming that they know what people want, right? So if we're building something, so let's imagine now that we have engaged with our stakeholders. So both from the builder side, the maker side, and both from the end user side. So if we have a solution, the simple questions that we need to ask ourselves is how to validate that that solution now makes sense. So there's two different categories here now that tend to kind of like mix and merge. So there's user testing and there's usability testing. So these are two different beasts. So user testing tries to answer the questions, do users need my app? So the solution that I have provided, do they actually want that? And the usability test answers the question, can the users use my app? Can they use that solution? So if you know that it makes sense, it's something that people want, then you go to usability test. So, but user testing, I think this is something that is more kind of like not addressed too well, at least, with my experience so far. And the good book to read here that I really suggest to read is UX Research. So this is a really practical book to give insight how to do proper research, how to do planning and preparation, facilitating it, and then analyzing and reporting about that. So let's go back to this guy, you know, we don't know what his name is. Let's call him Tony for the sake of it. And let's imagine that we need to have a conversation with Tony about the service or product that we have now come up with. So we need to make sure that it makes sense for Tony. So the structure or having a good conversation is actually something that needs to be prepared like really well. Like you never can be over prepared for a good conversation. And the structure for a good conversation, it's again the same principles that I mentioned before. So first of all, think what's the goal of your research. So I'm not just there to ask about the day, but I have a really specific context and goal in my mind. Then figure out what you want to learn. So what are exactly the domains, the questions that you want to understand? Because they're gifting you their time. This is really valuable, so you cannot waste that. It's really something, you know, that you need to kind of like understand in the back of your brain. And then take the time to translate the big research questions into interview questions. And now, if you see the bottom line there, so 3 mistakes that usually we do is that we tend to ask leading questions. So, for example, we would ask, you know, like, so imagine yourself using this product. You would suggest it to your friends, right? That's a leading question. So you don't give the other party any wiggle room to actually give you a context, right? And this goes with the second warning or thing to avoid is shallow questions. So do you prefer blue or red? That's a shallow question. That doesn't open up any context, right? And try to avoid, this is a really, really hard one, because we do, each and every one of us, we have our own tastes, we have our own preferences, we have our own beliefs, so personal biases. If you're having this conversation, try to avoid personal biases. For example, again, like, I hate cats, you also, right? So this is a personal bias, you know. And when you're designing the script for your conversation, like you can use another set of pair of eyes to make sure that you don't have these 3 mistakes inside. So yeah, make sure that you don't do that, you know. And now, and with this slide, what I wanted to say is, you know, like, it's a tricky one to have a good conversation because you know, like the feeling that when you drive a car, let's say, or when you see a policeman standing nearby, like you're like, did I do something wrong? You know, you have this feeling, right? Like this, like you cramp up immediately. Like, and usually when you ask somebody to a conversation, mostly the people also feel like, I'm being questioned, you know, like I need to give the right answers, you know. So really try to make the other party feel welcome, relaxed, and definitely make it clear that you're not there to investigate, you're there to understand. You're there to learn. And also try to avoid, you know, okay, my piece of paper, my questions, you know, like really like prepare for the conversation. Like make it feel, you know, like as a conversation, not as an interview. And always think about tricks. Always like share your own experience and ask others, you know, like, is there any way we can make it better? So for example, my own personal trick is my 2 dogs. So when I go to some sort of conversation and when I'm working with products that are meant for the society, then I hang around in cafeterias, in restaurants, places like this. You know, Corona is an exception. But before, I used my dogs for the medium, because when I was sitting in a cafeteria and I had my dogs, then a lot of people came actually to me and said, you know, like, can I make a picture or can I pet your dogs? I'm sure. And I would ask back, you know, like, can I have a 5-minute conversation with you with the product that I was building? So really try to be clever when having this conversation. And again, I cannot emphasize on the fact that even if we know that we know that we know, then we don't know what we don't know actually. So here's again like a simple exercise that a kid's shampoo. How wrong can you go with that? It's a shampoo that's made for kids. It looks fun, it's minion, it's familiar, you know, like we cannot go wrong with that, you know. Everybody knows how shampoo works. But they forgot one crucial part, which is real stories, real humans. And as soon as the product was launched into the market, this happened. So we need to be careful that even if it looks something that we cannot make a mistake, like accidents happen, right? We're all humans by the end of the day, but we can use a set of tools to avoid these mistakes. Like this is a fun one, but imagine this case. So a fly insect killer versus a cooking spray. This is a bad one, right? So we should really, you know, like ask this why from ourselves and really be curious about topics. And the same thing goes for everything that I do, like even for me, you know, like there was this debate about an application, what I was building, that do the end users in Abu Dhabi understand if these list elements are clickable? What I did was during a workshop lunch break, I went downstairs to Costa and I asked a few people around, like, can you go to, you know, blah, 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 and 0 issues. So half an hour, I got my cup of coffee, and I managed to go back to the meeting with validation. And again, a thing to avoid here is this kind of like, this is you know, like, this is how it has always been, you know, like, so here I pulled an example of Instagram and Pinterest. So pay attention to the lower part, the menu part. So one has it has labels underneath, the other one doesn't. So which is correct? The answer is both are correct, because they have different end users, different stories to tell. So we might get inspired by others, but we should question, we should be curious still. We should go back to the shampoo effect, you know. We should still need to make sure what works for us, for our stories. And like what happened to me many years ago was that I was giving this example of a Airbnb and the heart effect. So what happened there was that I explained when Airbnb again, like because they do a lot of end user engagement, like they do a lot of stakeholder engagement. So what they did was that they had this feature for apartment listing, and the function for that was was a star. And whilst they were listening to the end user stories, they decided to change the icon, the same function, into a heart. And they got conversion of 70% out of this change. And when I was giving this example, then some startups came back to me and said, we did the same thing, but no 70% conversion. So again, it's this Instagram Pinterest effect. So it might be inspirational, but question for yourself, does it work for me as well? So is it something that I can also work with? And whilst doing this stakeholder engagement in all directions, again, this is something that I like to kind of like highlight, which to be aware of are our own cognitive biases. But you can flip it around and also pay attention to your end user cognitive biases. So what are cognitive biases for those who don't know? There's about 188 of them, and this is literally how our brains help to operate every day. So you don't wake up each morning and like thinking that, okay, so if I move my hand like this, and this I need to do to grab my phone. So these are the things you don't think about. So it's experience, it's patterns that are familiar, it's something that just lets you be, you know, like as a human being. And for us, if we're working with stakeholder engagement, there's two cognitive biases that tend to kick in that we should avoid. So number one is framing effect. So again, we tend to frame towards what we want to actually, how we want the solution to be based on our own preference. So really, we should try to step outside of ourselves. So this is just a little bit of homework to read more what is a framing effect, cognitive bias. And the second thing that we tend to do is serial positioning effect. So it's the middle child effect. So if you have a bulk of something, a list, then we tend to focus on the first things and the last things, but we tend to skip what's happening there in the middle part. So try to really shuffle their learnings, you know, like shuffle the things that you're working with. So you don't have in your heads, you don't have this beginning and the end part. And the really last thing that I like to give as homework again is growth hacking. So we all want to rapidly generate, prioritize, and test our ideas, right? And there's a really excellent book written about that called Hacking Growth. So really, you know, like take your time to read this one. It's really good. And to wrap it all up, so it's all about teamwork. So it's not, you know, that service designer has all the answers. They have methods, but everybody can adopt those methods. So if you're doing this kind of like stakeholder engagement, it should not be a task of one person. It should be the task of everybody inside of the team. So again, it's literally engaging your own internal stakeholders as well. So it goes in all directions in that manner. And thank you. So this is where you can reach out to me in my virtual office.
Thank you, Helen, for this really practical and by-the-book lecture, I would say. So all the hints and tools you provided, I hope that they will be useful for our listeners as well. But I know that Robert is ready now. And good morning, Robert.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi. So the screen is yours. So you can start with the presentation. Yeah.
All right, queuing up my presentation now. Not seeing it yet. Here we go. Okay. Well, again, thank you, Helen. That was really a technical masterclass. I wish I had your service back when I was developing my startup. And today, what I'm going to do is to give a little bit more of a human perspective on some of the aspects that I went through when developing a company, a startup company that actually used a lot of the empathy fueled innovation that we were talking about, that Helen was talking about earlier. And I titled my presentation Grandma-Led Innovation. It's more of a funny riff on my approach, which is patient-driven innovation, which is something that I do here in Boston, where I live and I'm a native. And this is all about how to partner with the senior community you serve. So in this case, patient-driven innovation, grandma-led innovation. So I'm the managing director of MassNext. We are the world's first life science diplomacy agency that aligns academia, government, industry and philanthropy in order to advance patient advocacy. We were established in 2020. We are headquartered in my hometown in Boston and also in Zug, Switzerland. We saw a need to really focus on the patient and to build a new framework that advanced patient advocacy in a way that aligned incentives for all of the stakeholders. And in this presentation, what I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about some of those stakeholders and how you can approach the incentives and how to align with those incentives with your products. So a little bit more about my experience. I've been working in startups and innovation for my whole career. I was raised in the Boston ecosystem. For the first decade of my career, I worked in fintech and in high tech and in software with venture-backed startups that were acquired. That did not give me the warm and fuzzy feeling I wanted at the end of each day. So I eventually, in the early 2000s, pivoted primarily into healthcare, into life science. And I'm very lucky that my hometown is the #1 life science cluster in the world, where I could seek the support of programs like MassBio, the Massachusetts Biotechnology Council, where I actually developed my patient-driven business development strategy, understanding how to align with the stakeholders that you serve. Today, I'm also a healthcare innovation professor at NYU, and also doing a lot of work across different patient stakeholder groups like NORD, the National Organization for Rare Disorders, especially on Rare Disease Day, which is February 28th. And then I also have 2 other nonprofits that I support. One is the National Brain Tumor Society, which you'll find out in a moment why that is so personal to me. And then also the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, which has really been my education into understanding what can happen when you have trust between patient communities, families, and industry, all aligned for the same cause to change livelihoods and to change futures, really creating futures for the patients and families that you serve. This community has been my inspiration, and I talked about this also. This is actually the second installment of a presentation that I originally gave at Stanford Medicine X, talking about my experience here in the Boston ecosystem, connecting all the stakeholders across our ecosystem. And it was then I was going through the experience, and I'll tell you in a moment what was going on, but just some observations first to keep in mind about the population. And it's that in the United States, and we're talking about the United States market here, which is enormous. And of course, it's no news to anybody that cancer and conditions are a huge population, but just to put into perspective, it's 1.9 million people every year diagnosed in America with cancer. Similarly, a lot of the senior population, they have what are considered to be comorbid conditions. And I see here Medicare, and that's the 65 and older crowd, folks who are actually covered by government-administered insurance, Medicare. And they, on average, have 2.2 comorbid conditions. So that could be anything from COPD, hypertension, Alzheimer's, dementia. Maybe they do have some cancer, arthritis, mental health, diabetes. So on average, as you can imagine, folks who are older tend to have more health issues, and the average Medicare patient has 2.2 of those. So besides them being your grandmother or your grandfather, you also have to keep in mind that they need to follow a regimen, and they need to follow a certain wellness regimen in order to ensure that that they don't experience any hospitalizations or any reactions, adverse reactions to the medications that they're taking. So this is something that must always be kept in mind. And then the last observation I'm going to make, and this is something I had to learn the hard way, which is that community support, your friends and your family and your loved ones, that can be really the game changer when you go through some sort of event, a bad diagnosis, or a traumatic event in your family with a family member. But the reverse is true also. Isolation can have a negative effect, a devastating effect. And too often in our society, we live in a fragmented society where oftentimes we don't live in the same household anymore. You can't just take care of your grandma or your mother. You live far away. And so there are those logistical challenges that must be overcome. And maybe that was a problem in the past, but I'm a visionary, and I like to think that we can use technology to help solve that problem. And so it's important to keep in mind this relationship, because we all know it's true that community is a source of strength, and it's a force of hope, and it helps us to prop ourselves up when we're down. However, the reverse is also true when you've had maybe a diagnosis or someone has passed away in your family. You have all of that support, maybe come to your funeral or funeral services, but then what? And that's the moment that I was thinking about when developing my product. And so the spotlight of my presentation is really on the state of Florida. We use this expression in the United States, jokingly, it's called heaven's waiting room. And the reason for that is it has the highest elderly population in the United States. This is the source is the Florida Department of Elder Affairs. The 65-year-old crowd, that's almost 25% of the entire state of Florida. So when you consider just the sheer number of folks down there who are 65 and older, and people are aging well beyond that now. One of the 100 plus people who live past 100 is actually one of the fastest growing groups in Florida. So I found that to be fascinating, and it's really, there's a very good reason for why people from parts of the country, especially those cold parts of the country, why they escape to Florida. And that's for this. It's a very livable place. If anyone is from a cold climate, such as us here in Boston, this is the dream, to get your little slice of paradise. To they always have names like Parker Lakes, or the Villages is another one that you might have heard of. They all have these kind of exotic, kind of wholesome American names that sounds like a great community to come down to. And certainly this is how they advertise themselves in these senior communities, 55 and older communities. Of course, you have your water aerobics classes, and your shuffleboard, and your tennis. And this is exactly the reason why it's like going away. It's like choosing which college campus you want to be on. If you're American, that plays a big part in the decision of which school you go to. It's the same when seniors decide to retire. They really look at, who is that community? Who are the people? Are they like me? Where are they coming from? Are they coming from New York, or are they coming from Boston, or are they coming from the Midwest? Could that be a good thing to meet people from all over the country? And there's a lot of excitement. So I remember when my in-laws were retiring, my father-in-law, Don, had two comorbid conditions, diabetes and hypertension and other issues even. And so this was a major reason for why my family thought it was such a great idea to retire to a place like Florida. His mobility was down. He needed to be on flat land, and things here in Boston are not always made for. It's a very competitive place, and costs are high. It seemed like the right thing to do, and I still believe it's the right thing to do. I need to go back to the next slide. And so you have things like pools and these very, very livable. If you look at the real estate in Florida, it's very, very livable. The problem is that's what is sold to. True for a little while. That might be, in my case, how my in-laws were able to experience life for a few really, really good, happy years. And things changed. But for them, it was all about the beach and baseball, because that's where the Boston Red Sox have their spring training. My father-in-law especially was in love with the Red Sox, and had season tickets. And that was his dream, was to be a season holder and to be able to experience the life down there. And he achieved that. So I'm very happy that he was able to achieve that. However, I got the call one day, and it was, Rob, are you sitting down? And yes, and then it was communicated to me that Don had been slurring his speech, dropping his keys, being forgetful. They knew something was wrong, and they found a growth in his brain. And this was just devastating to my family. We knew something was terribly wrong. Something was, we were just traumatized at that point. That was the beginning of it. We realized that the hospitals in Florida were not quite as good as the ones in Boston. So the first thing that we did was to fly him and my mother-in-law up to live with us, in the Boston area. And so he had, scans done, and what they found was a rare type of brain tumor, glioblastoma. And he had that, sorry for the grotesque picture, but this is what I looked at every day for 3 months, waking up in my house, recognizing that my father-in-law needed our help. Everything in our lives changed in that moment when we saw up close and personal what it was going to be like for the latter, part of his life. And we knew that we didn't have the capacity ourselves to continue on with our careers, but to also take care of him during his time, because we didn't put ourselves first. We recognized that we needed to take care of him. And so what that meant for me was to take care of my wife. And it also meant my wife was also helping her mother, who was really the primary caregiver. She's there on the right. Ironically, before they retired, she was the head of special events for the National Brain Tumor Society. So we already had a personal connection to this disease because her father actually passed away from a brain tumor as well. So we knew what we were in for. And we had been around a lot of other patients and a lot of other families who had been through, one of these devastating experiences, but that did nothing to prepare us. In fact, it just made us realize what the future was going to be. For me, being a technical guy, being in the technology world, I figured there must be an app for this. So I downloaded, dozens of apps, and none of them were created in a way that truly engaged and harnessed that empathy. The problem that I was trying to solve was community support. How can I make it easy for caregivers to get the help that they need, because they need to be in a good place and be supported if they hope to help the patient in a positive way as well. So throughout this process, unfortunately, Don lost his battle. He went back to Florida, where he did chemotherapy. And that was really the best choice, because that was his, paradise, and he deserved to be there. But as throughout this entire process, the person that I was thinking about the most was my mother-in-law, Karen. And the reason why is because this picture was taken when we spread Don's ashes outside of Boston Harbor. We went well beyond the harbor, and we dropped his ashes. And during that time, I can't even imagine what was going through her head, and just staring off into the ocean and seeing what her life was going to be like post Don. And I don't think anyone was really thinking about that, how to really engage with her emotional state. And I know technology wasn't, because I was inventing that technology tool. And so this image here is what will always stick in my mind about this moment. This is Boston Light. This is the oldest lighthouse in America. And this is what we looked at. We looked back and we looked at the lighthouse protecting the city. This lighthouse protected Boston for the early part of our entire country's history. It's something that I think about all the time, because I think, where's the light caregivers? How can we build a safety net so that people don't fall through? And I'm talking about their clinically from medication and wellness, from activity and exercise and all that, but also from just the healthcare system in general, systematically efficient, and also engagement when it comes to the pharmaceutical industry as well, which I'll explain in a moment. So I developed Tunza, which was meant to be a caregiver support application that makes it easy for caregivers to get help. And what I discovered during this process, and Helen, I wish I had Helen's expertise back then because I had to figure this out the hard way. It was really just that caregivers have such a hard time asking for help. They're in the thick of their drama, and while they might have friends who are well-meaning and who care and reach out and say, what can I do to help? What I discovered, and I looked across all different conditions. Obviously, aging and the senior community was a big one, just because everyone has a parent or a loved one that's not nearby and they care about them, and you know, they have their own issue dealing with. But I looked across all different conditions: rare diseases, oncology, mental health, aging. But in my instance, what we were talking about was brain tumors. The experience really taught me a lot about what I needed to do to better serve who my real user was. And we made a lot of assumptions and presumptions around. We were absolutely certain, we seemed to have all the elements and knowledge that it took, but we did the gun, and we did build a technical tool really before we truly understood who our end user was. And that's something that sometimes you have to learn the hard way, and we ended up retooling and rebuilding the app, and it ended up being a much better experience after that. But the experience with Tunza taught me that everyone talks about helping caregivers, and when I downloaded dozens of different apps, they were probably developed by some extremely intelligent software developers and technical teams, but none of them really did what I wanted it to do, which was more about how to make life easier for caregivers, not harder. And what I mean by that is that the apps had all the bells and whistles that you'd expect out of a great technology application, but they had the user wrong, because the caregivers have no time and really no willingness to use this app. Instead, what we needed to recognize was the untapped goodwill that existed with their friends and with their loved ones, who were constantly asking us, what can I do to help? What can I do to help? Well, what we needed was a technology tool that managed those tasks and made it easy for them to offer help. And it also made it easier for us to ask for help. So that was Tunza really in a nutshell. We wanted to, again, make it easy for caregivers to get help and for supporters to offer it. And the way that I approached it initially, during the first year of our development, I thought about what I originally called the 3 F's of patient engagement, which were feelings, finances, and functions. Feelings, well, I went into that already, the emotional state that we're in. We need to be very, very gentle with our users, and we need to make them recognize that they should trust us. We are here to help them, and that is easier said than done. People, whether it's caregivers or patients, there's something that we can do to help them that doesn't cost any money at all. Maybe it's just being there for them, saying, hey, I'm available after work on Tuesday. Do you need someone to just sit with you? These are things that can't be monetized by industry, so you don't see them in apps. It's not something that there's no service provider for that yet. So we find it hard sometimes to think about needs or productized solutions when maybe there isn't something there that actually costs money. Maybe it's just human presence, human emotion, being there for one another during that time of crisis is actually the number one thing. And so we built this user interface, and you'll see the heart, the support button there. That's a big part of that. And there's other ways to look at it too. Your actions sometimes speak louder for your words than your words. So if it sometimes doesn't need to be a hug or sending someone a emoticon with a heart. Sometimes or emoji with a heart. Sometimes it's something else. Sometimes it's baking them a cake or making something that's their favorite food. I know that works for me when my friends remember the things that I like, and that shows that they care. So that's also wrapped up into it. And that brings up the question of finances as well, because oftentimes, such is the case with caregiver communities, somebody needs to leave the workforce, in order to take care of the family, in order to take care of, really someone needs to oftentimes bow out of working and instead focus on their need right now, which is to take care of their loved one during this time of crisis. And there's huge emotional strain on this. Determinants of health, the zip code where you were born in America, at least, is the #1 determinant of your health. So, say you're born in you're living in one of these areas that's a very expensive area, like say Boston or New York or San Francisco, and one of your loved ones, gets sick and you can't work anymore. That might mean you can't live there anymore. You might have to live somewhere else. You might have to, it's very disruptive to your life. It's those of us who, even for the people who are living well, when you're not making as much money, all of a sudden that becomes, difficult. So you do have your economic needs. The reality is life has to go on. Just because you're, taking care of someone every day, you're not exactly going into the grocery store at that point and thinking, how do I save money? You're going in there in order to get out of the, and go back home to be with that person. And there's just the logistical aspects of that too. All the burden that you have on your life right now, imagine having to do that and take care of somebody who has, just had a piece of their brain removed and they're sitting in your living room every day. And that was what my life was like. So while I definitely recognize the need to take care of them from a mental wellness and emotional support perspective, what I recognized, I basically became the logistical guy, and my job was to do all the shopping and to do all the chores around the house. And this is while I also had a career and I was founding, a startup. So, I'm balancing all these different things in my life and trying to keep it all in the air. And that might be fine 9 times out of 10. My friends would ask me, "Do you need help?" And I'd say, "No, I'm okay. I'm okay." But on the 10th day, maybe not so much. Maybe that was your low day. Maybe something happens, or you get some bad news that the scan didn't come back like you wanted it to from the hospital, from the specialist, and that can be really emotionally traumatizing just on that day. And so you have all of these different aspects and functionally that you need to take care of. Not just the paying for it, but also going there and doing it. And things like chores around the house. Are you thinking about cleaning your bathtub during time when somebody's dying? Not really, but you should, because you still have to clean your bathtub. So all these things really still have to go on. And I recognized, wow, we live in a time when the golden age of technology, when if we deploy third-party products in a way that streamlines this experience, then you can actually solve this problem. This is an achievable problem. Technology is limitless. The answer, the question is why? Why utilize that technology for the problem that you're solving? And then so during this process, I did some stakeholder analysis and discovered this another F. It's actually PH, but funny again, calling it pharma. And these are medical needs. As I said before, 2.2 comorbid conditions. And this plays in a big role because these folks are prescribed on oftentimes expensive pharmaceutical products. And there are some issues, as I'll get into in a minute, which can be a problem during this time, but it can also be, I think, the most effective, one of the most effective forms of stakeholder engagement that you can use to actually support innovation is to recognize the role of the pharmaceutical industry. So I'll get into a few different stakeholders here. The first is payers. When you're developing an app, of course you want the users to use it. You want them to recommend it to their friends. Ultimately, as Helen said, you need to think about who your end user is, and everything revolves around that. However, to think about who your co-conspirators are, the people who would have a vested interest in seeing you succeed. This is where I advise everyone to think about your positioning and how you communicate your value proposition. Even before you've developed the product, you want to recognize that these are people who would, your potential partner of today could be your acquirer of tomorrow. So if what you're doing is generating value for them, then they will often have a nice relationship with you because they're recognizing how you can plug into what they're doing. The example I'm using here, especially because we're talking about the 65 and older crowd, is the private insurers, but also government programs like Medicare. Think about how your product or your solution actually saves them money. And this is very sobering for people because they don't really boil it down this way or do this type of modeling analysis. But it's very important to understand, is a payer even willing to accept this? Is this something that they would support? Would they see the value of this in aligning with their marketing programs? And the way that they're looking at it is in terms of return on investment. They look at the population that you're serving within their plan, within their health plan, and then they spread out the cost savings, so the value that you create across the whole plan. And so what they calculate is your per member per month savings and PMPM, and that is how payers look at return on investment. So it's literally, if it costs $1 and per patient, however you price your solution, and then they're able to save $10 per patient per month, well, you got a really nice product there in your hands. And that's the way to communicate it to the payers. They are in the business of risk. So anything that you can do to alleviate their risk, literally helping them to not have to pay and reimburse their members for the different services and things that they might incur. And the second stakeholder to realize in the payer space is the relationship with public health and policy. And the reason why this is very interesting is because there are in the United States a lot of lobbying efforts, authentically coming from the community to help, understand the role of caregiving and caregiver support. For example, with various departments of elder affairs across all of the United States, they recognize this has wellness and making sure that patients and seniors are well taken care of and follow the protocols and follow adherence and compliance. This all has a very important implication on public health. As you saw in the state of Florida, it's 25% of the population at least. So if the state of Florida knows that if they can mobilize and support seniors, then this will have an important impact on their own economic development. And so much more broad than just talking about healthcare. This is much bigger than that. And so it's important to realize how this interrelationship between health insurance, especially when it comes to caregivers, and Medicare, which is a government-run program, and how as costs continue to go up, how they're looking at this pool of money that needs to be used to allocate towards all these patients. And what they're looking for is ways to save money across the entire ecosystem. So that's something that people often don't consider. And one of the reasons why they should consider Medicare is because it is, the biggest health insurance payer in the country, in the United States. Every state has a Medicare program, and if you can work it out with one state or with one administrator of that, then that can be scaled across the entire country. Versus working with a private insurer, where one private insurer might be one, health plan, and then even within the same state, you have to work with another health insurance provider, and it's like an entirely new customer. So it's also a scalable strategy to think about public health and policy as well. Caregivers, as I've gone into before, is just understanding the dynamics of this community support. I said before, families are just fragmented. They're facing these logistical challenges of supporting a loved one from a distance. And people think about, what it will take to take care of grandma. But, what grandma cares about is her grandkids and her own kids. And so there's a dynamic there that must be played on, where you need to gain their trust and you need to make it their idea to do the right thing. You can't tell. Has anyone ever tried to tell their grandmother how to do something? No, it's her idea. And you have to really create a solution that helps them to see why doing the right thing is going to have value. Usually it's an emotional connection. Usually it's helping them to recognize that, hey, grandma, if you don't do your exercises and your medication properly, I want you to be able to spend as much time with your grandkids as possible. It sounds mean, but it's kind of the truth. It's what people are thinking about, is how am I going to be here for as long as I can to be with my family. So positioning that can be kind of an engagement exercise in and of itself to recognize whether or not what you're doing is seen as being confrontational to their lifestyle, or if it's something where they recognize it's their idea to want to do it and it actually fits within their goals of the moment. Next slide, nonprofits. So this is really where the stakeholder that I feel is just not engaged enough, not just by European stakeholders coming to, companies and other groups coming to the United States, but especially by American organizations. We fail to understand, who do patients trust? Why? Why do they trust nonprofit organizations and maybe not other stakeholders? And the reason for that is the dynamics of nonprofits in the United States are very different than in Europe, for example. And there are numerous reasons for this, but I think the top two are, number one, reimbursement here is a lot different than the way it works in socialized medicine across most of Europe. People here fall through the cracks every day. And they can fall through the cracks for a number of reasons: administratively, issues of access, the geography they live in, just transitions. Maybe they just lost their job, and now they're finding it hard to get back on another health plan that is as good as their old one. There's a lot of reasons for that, and I think in the United States, the reason why these nonprofits mobilized was for that very reason, because there was no one else to help them. And so these nonprofit organizations become the mission charter holders for the communities that they serve. And oftentimes these nonprofits don't recognize how much power they have, because they are, after all, a nonprofit organization run sort of like pseudo businesses. They are, after all, nonprofit, but they rely on the generous donations of private donors who have to write a check to them and actually support the sustainability in that respect. And so things like marketing and things like business development are often not the primary concerns for nonprofits. Rather, it's more about the mission, things like lobby work, policy work, and the biggest one within the senior community is AARP, the American Association of Retired People. And they are now shortened to AARP. They're the biggest, and they are, have a huge presence in places like Florida. Everybody who, I think when you turn 55 now, they start to send you the AARP materials in the mail, which usually makes people feel old, but they're onboarding you. It's a brand now, and they're not the only one. They're the one that's more for nonprofits across the entire aging population. But there's certainly for every disease, whether it's the Alzheimer's Association or the MS Society or diabetes. There's every disease you can think of has some advocacy organization whose mission it is to advocate for the people who suffer with that disease or that condition. So AARP might be a broad one, but if you're dealing with a specific condition, I advise you to work in collaboration with that community that you serve. They can be the good housekeeping stamp of approval that can help you to build trust with that community. But getting there can be difficult because nonprofits oftentimes are skeptical or cynical about the role of industry. And more recently, there have been some organizations that have harnessed the power of nonprofits, and that's where I got my experience working with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, where they actually have worked with some pharmaceutical companies to actually literally create tomorrows for patients with cystic fibrosis. So definitely don't discount the role of nonprofits. It will be a softer, gentler touch. You cannot go in there talking about the business aspects of what you do. It will be all about empathy. It will be all about the status quo and how you can change that. Oftentimes they won't even recognize that there is an opportunity to change the status quo. You have to evangelize what you're doing, and you have to help them see why their community is so powerful, again, within the community that they serve. Right. And the last one, this is the one that this is really the major innovation of my application, Tunza, it was to understand the role of commerce in our world. And we're seeing this in the pandemic. Everything that you can buy in a store, mostly everything that you can buy in a store now can be delivered. And it can be delivered through third-party apps. You know, the actual stores and shops themselves are often now e-commerce enabled, because they recognize that if they didn't, then it's quite possible that the downward trend in shopping during the pandemic was going to put them out of business. And their peers, many of them were put out of business. So these are just some of the larger national or international brands that you might know. But what the idea of Tunza was, when you click on the different areas, whether it's chores or, you know, the feelings, functions, and finances part, those all map back to one of these services. So maybe I can't give somebody a ride myself, but I can buy them an Uber or I can buy them a Lyft. And that solves the problem for both of us. If I can't be there, it's suddenly technology job, right? We have, you know, people, the way that people live their lives, and then we have the systems that people actually follow within their lifestyles or, you know, within the world. And then what we're doing is prescribing a technology that fits within the systems. So in that way, technology is finally augmenting the human experience, and we can use Uber in a way that is more empathy driven. The same goes for things like Instacart, buying you know, groceries from a grocery store. People are finding that not even to be a good use of their time now, and that's why you see Instacart. You know, even before the pandemic, people were doing that. Maybe you know, what we should do is think about Instacart as a service provider, as a health company, making sure that we always have the kind of healthy groceries that we're going to need to adhere with whatever our health regimen might be. You know, reducing that friction is the name of the game. How do you make sure that people follow their care plans and do so in a way that is not disruptive to the rest of their lives? Because it's really, really difficult to follow a care plan and not, you know, kind of fall back into that pit of despair. And that's why it's important not only to have your friends around you for the emotional support, but for them also to be involved in your life, for them to understand and for you to understand how that emotional bond, that emotional handshake is happening between the people who care about you and also your willingness to open up to them. And so when that starts to happen, these products, you know, Uber and Lyft and TaskRabbit and all these companies have put a lot of money and a lot of funding into their user experiences. So why reinvent the wheel? Let's just bring it all under one umbrella so that it can be just a drop down and they can be the delivery service provider for whatever the service is that you need. So the last one is really my world here in Boston. I work you know, across health tech, but a big part of that is the role of the pharmaceutical company. I believe they have the largest economic motive of all the stakeholders. Of course, payers and providers care so much about cost savings and efficiency, but that is always cost savings, right? It's always about how do we lower our costs? That's the value that's being created. So think about it from a value proposition perspective. You're communicating to the head of a hospital or to the head of an insurance plan. Your value proposition might be that you can save them 5%, 10%, you know, per member per month based on an app that you're trying to, you know, to sell them. Well, that might be true this year. You might be able to save them 5% or 10% this year, but can you sustain that growth? Will it be 5% savings every year or just the first year? So are you a stopgap towards their larger goal, or are you something that's going to sustainably, you know, do that straight line approach and save them a lot of money down the road as well? I think that's a dangerous road to go on. I think it's a dangerous value proposition to sell to payers and providers in that way, although that's a perfectly fine value proposition if that's what you choose to do. What I venture to say is to think about who the stakeholder is with the deepest pockets, and that is undoubtedly pharma. Pharma cares about a lot of things. They're developing products. They know that the products are very expensive. The nature of the pharmaceutical industry is when we pay for a product, we're actually paying for the failures that company had rather than for the success. That's what creates, you know, a big part of the cost. and they have a lot of failure. There's only 14% of clinical trials that succeed. So if you can plug into their value motives and into their economic motives, what they care about is adherence, and they care about things like clinical trials, recruitment, and engagement. And so this is where my company, Tunza, had our aha moment, because while, yes, adherence, and working with my advisors and my mentors here in Boston, they've communicated that, adherence is the best predictor of future health. So from a pharmacovigilance perspective, pharma companies want to know that people are taking the drugs how they're supposed to be taken. And there's a huge value to that, to staying on their plan, to following the warning labels and not having any reactions and things like that. That can be very expensive, not just for the patient and the provider, but also it can be a negative thing for the pharmaceutical companies as well, for their marketing, for their public relations. And I'm not sure if you've heard, but there's not a whole lot of trust between patients and the pharmaceutical companies. So there's definitely something there to discuss, because if they are the stakeholder with the deepest pockets, and they have such a motive to engage patients and their families, then why is there no trust? Why does that trust break down? And that's really been the focus of my career up till now, is how can I bring those two groups together so that we can start much earlier in the process and follow more or less the same process that Helen described, which is not to assume that you know your customer. There's known knowns, known unknowns, and a lot of unknown unknowns that fail to be discovered. And unfortunately, they find this out the hard way during clinical trials, both trying to recruit for clinical trials, but also engage and retain patients that are in their families, who are literally the ones pushing them in wheelchairs, and so forth, not recognizing what it really takes to gain that trust. And I won't name names, but there's a major pharmaceutical company from Europe that has been making a lot of moves coming to the Boston area. And one of their clinical trial innovation experts was one of our advisors. And they have something called accrual delays in the pharmaceutical industry in clinical trial recruitment. And this is the cost of actually putting it together and running it. And so when a patient drops out of a blockbuster drug for one of these big companies, it can cost in direct costs anywhere from 1.7 million to 3 million per patient per day, just to backfill who that person who dropped out of the clinical trial. So my question was always, why if this is so expensive and they've gone through all of the all of the effort of recruiting and marketing to, and going through all the paperwork and convincing the family that this is a good idea and all those steps, why don't they do a better job of retaining that patient within the clinical trial? And what I discovered is it's a big part of that is the caregiver. Also making sure that the caregivers recognize why it's important to stay in that clinical trial. There is a point, though, where patients and families start to say, this isn't going to work. While we have been contributing to science, and we've been going into the hospital weekly, monthly for these tests and for this trial, it's not going to get better for our loved one, and it's really having a negative toll in our lives as well. And so there's a point where this happens, where folks just understand, hey, this isn't going to work for us, and we need to spend the end of his life with us, and this is how we need to live out the rest of his life. And that's something that folks, it's a difficult thing to consider, but it's reality as well. And so that really is the main driver of what I feel is the healthcare system today. Of course, it's the cost of drugs is also a big part of it. So adherence is easier for some than others. It depends upon what their living situation is. It depends upon how serious they are about it. But again, following your care plan and doing what your doctor told you to do is actually the best predictor. So it follows that from a distance, what I think all of us care about in terms of taking care of our grandmothers and grandfathers and parents, especially from a distance, is, are they taking care of themselves? Are they doing without me having to watch them and be, the police. Hey, don't drink that glass of wine with your, high blood pressure medication, or whatever the expression, the example might be. This is what we worry about from afar. Is I showed that picture of the senior center, the senior retirement homes down in Florida, and it looks, if you looked at the brochures, it looks an awful lot like a college brochure, a university brochure, to know what kind of college you're going to go to, and they're telling you all about the activities. I looked at that and I said, uh-oh, that sounds like a lot of fun, but how well does that align with wellness? And that would be another group that I would say is an important stakeholder from an industry perspective, although I didn't create a slide for this. I would say that if I wasn't from the United States, or, and I was coming in and I was trying to understand where do these people sit? Who are some of the affinity organizations out there that you can partner with who would recognize the need to promote wellness? Definitely one of those would be those communities, those senior living communities. The reason why is because they're actually marketing against each other to try to promote this and they also have app ecosystems and things that you can plug into, and a lot of them are technology driven now, because it's a scalable way of adding to that experience, having a welcome message, having different concierge services depending upon what you need within the community itself. This makes it so that they don't have to hire someone full-time at the front desk, for example. And you have that consistent brand messaging, which can be white labeled. You can assume the branding of whoever that community is. So they're actually the communities themselves. It's a different sell, and it's definitely not something that I don't think folks have recognized as the opportunity to partner with some of those communities, and maybe even giving them a cut of the revenue, because when it's coming from them and you have their branding and their consistent, trusted message that's coming from them, people are much more apt to engage and to trust that this is something new that they should try, because it's part of their ecosystem already. It's not something new outside, off the reservation. It's something that's part of that consistent brand message. So there's definitely a value proposition there, not just for the experience, but in terms of user adoption and user engagement. I think that's the main point, is how do we onboard and get people to understand that this app was created to help them, right? So that's the last slide, and I will take any questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert, for sharing your personal story and also your business story. So it was really exciting to get an insight to a completely different world from Europe, I would say. But now, yes, we have few questions, and also those who are listening, you can still send your questions or drop your questions under the link of this online event. So, but let's start from the beginning. You both really emphasized and talked a lot about end users' involvement, and it looks like kind of like the knowledge is there, the tools are there, but still, if we look at the resources or service, then we can see that involvement of end users is not enough. It's one of the biggest barriers. So why is that? I don't know. Like Helen, would you like to start? Can
you ask the second part of the question again? So there's the biggest, yeah.
Yeah. So why we haven't learned these tools or different approaches, and we are still struggling with the fact that end users are not involved in developing the solutions?
So for me, the answer here is quite simple. It's something I talked about before. It's biases, right? So again, it's as human being, it's a human thing, right? Like it's so easy to think that I know what people want, right? So the simple, and plus, it doesn't necessarily come to our nature to ask, so what do you actually care about, So I would say it's overcoming the fact of personal opinions trust and the fact of really being curious about another person, you know, like, because we tend to talk about ourselves, but really listen to another person. That's the trick here.
Okay, Robert.
Yeah, I think it comes from a place of separating business from the self. It's about recognizing the potential of what humanity can do for one another, and we oftentimes lose sight of that because we live in the business world. We have to pay money. We have to, you know, so people are. It comes down to that trust factor. How can you actually gain the trust and the access to the people, and how much are they willing to open up to you, you know, in a way that is valuable for both sides. It takes a long time to get there, but in business we don't have time. So how do you work and leverage the relationships you already have to get even deeper trust and get someone to open up to you about their vulnerabilities? That doesn't happen overnight, right? So this is why I think business people who are doing this are realizing that this is not going to be as straightforward as what other businesses are. We're dealing with emotions. We're dealing with people's, you know, loved ones who they've lost. And there's a special nature behind healthcare. And that's why we haven't really been able to, you know, engage patients and families to do the right thing, like maybe Google has done to encourage people to spend money on their credit cards, right? So it's a very different scenario, one versus the other. And I actually see this as an opportunist because I see this very optimistically now, because it's really a green field of opportunity if we can understand how to harness that emotion in a better way.
Thank you. Inactive and healthy aging, there can be multiple end users actually for your solution, for your service. And you, Helen, you said that you need to identify who is your user. But well, maybe it doesn't sound very nice, but now I'm going to say it out loud. There can be different goals of for the different stakeholders. For instance, you as a person, you would like to have this feeling of safety and to be taken care of. But then again, municipality here in Europe, in most cases, who is paying for the service, or insurance company, for instance, they have completely different goals. Mm-hmm. So who to listen? Mm-hmm. What to do?
So for me, like it's kind of like this question. So if I'm building a product that's meant for everybody, right? Mm-hmm. So even if we think about, like, the first example that always comes to my mind is Facebook. And for those who are listening here in Estonia, like, we know the product asti.ee, right? And so they both share kind of like that it's meant for everybody, but there's a really simple trick how to get to the first end users. So basically what you would need to do is, inside of a team, like, discuss who are the focus groups, right? Because also Facebook didn't like first set the goal like we'll do it for everybody, right? They had a very specific focus group in mind. And if you have these hypotheses of like who might be the different stakeholders, you start again the conversation, and as a team you would discuss, you know, like, where do you get the highest impact? So for example, like, who are the first stakeholders to engage with the platform most probably, and who will send the message out the first, you know, and then everybody else will join in, you know. So it's kind of like still coming from focus groups and then measuring the impact, go-to-market strategy, all of those things.
Robert?
Yeah, similarly, I do think though that it's a relationship between the patients and how the company is making money. If patients and their families don't feel comfortable with the way that their insights or their clicks, even if it's a free product, if it's a free product, then your inputs are the product being sold to whoever the person, you know, and the Facebook is a perfect example because it's a free product. People don't think about who is the actual customer of Facebook. It's the advertisers, right? I mean, our clicks are actually the oil that is powering Facebook. So people don't realize that, but we're all comfortable with it. Maybe we wouldn't be comfortable with it if it was a health product, though. That's what I'm saying. So if it's a health product, you have to think, you know, why hasn't there been a Facebook for health yet? Well, because of that trust factor. We don't want to know that our hopes, you know, dreams and vulnerabilities and connections and personal, you know, stories are being, profited on, basically. However, that is the nature of the economy today. We live in, a world now where these apps, depend upon, the ramp up of users and user adoption, but the actual business model is selling to somebody else. So within health, we need to reconcile that trust, and we need to do a better job of alignment. I always say align with the community that you serve. So there's no easy answer to that. So that's the difficult thing. There's no easy answer to that. But it always comes down to, in our instance, we were working a lot with Tunza. We were working a lot with various clinical settings, and within that clinical setting, there was often a family crisis counselor. That person was also a form of user for us, and if they didn't support what we were doing, then patients didn't trust it. So they were an important user of the app, even though they weren't paying for it. So there's also these other dotted line or reinforce the customer experience that can help to promote that. But we wouldn't have known to include them if we didn't recognize that breakdown in trust between industry and patients. So we recognize the importance of them as being that kind of a guide throughout that process to help them even discover that our app works in the first place.
Thank you. Now I have a question here. How to create change management in health and care to implement innovative solutions, and is it even needed? Because when we talk about that, the problem or the need should come from the patient or from the individual. So, do we need even to change anything in their behavior or something like, I don't know, how to create change management? Yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go. I believe absolutely. I believe 9 times out of 10, customers don't know what they want. Steve Jobs was an expert in this. Major innovations, people have to be a visionary to recognize what their customers want, and then the risk is building what you think that vision is, and hoping that you're through user testing and whatnot that you're actually that it's going to resonate with that community. But if you ask someone, what is it that you need, especially if they have a health condition, while their insights are invaluable to the pharmaceutical industry and to industry in general, these are normal people who won't be able to articulate, hey, I need an app that's going to make it easy for me to get help. They won't tell you that. It's just not, you'll never get them to articulate it in that way. However, something they communicate to you might help you to understand what their needs are. Right. And so they won't be in that sophisticated MBA, business analysis way. You have to kind of listen deeper than and ask really good questions. So that goes to what Helen's whole framework is all about.
Yeah, for me it's the same. Like, of course, there needs to be in every field, like this somebody who pushes forward, like to this, like, let's call it innovation, like in quotation marks. But how to do it? And the method that has worked for me, like, quite easily is that if you need to push a topic forward, then you map down. Let's say if we take based on a company, right? So you map down like who are the stakeholders internally. It doesn't really matter like what's their official like working title, but I call them champions. So you map down who are the champions who want to make the change happen, and you put them together to work as an innovation team. And because they are people who are more outspoken, like who really want to see the change happen, they will grab with their energy the whole company underneath, So this is basically how I see usually like change happen in bigger fields like health or industry or companies like that, yeah.
Actually, now I'm going to ask a question from it's my personal question. So one of the outcomes of this project is to build a tool for participatory design with all the stakeholders and all, including stakeholders who are actually going to use the solution. So my question is, from your business side, like, what do you need as a business owner to really to feel comfortable in scaling up your innovative solution? For instance, here in Europe, you would like to come to Europe with your solution. What do you need from this kind of?
Yeah, that's a big question. That's a really big question.
I
think,
just if you don't know the answer right yet, it's okay. Just give me your insight, because we have 2 years to figure out the answer.
Yeah, no, I think it's an important question to ask, and I commend you on the project, because it is so important to have participatory design. I think the way to the tools and the resources that it takes is focused on the features and benefits, and mapping that back to how that's satisfying the need, how that's uncovering the need in some instances where this patient or the community that you're serving doesn't necessarily realize that this is something they need. But to have hard data, not qualitative data, quantitative data, to be able to show feature A versus feature B, to do that kind of MVP, level analysis and minimally viable product analysis, to show that this is something that the status quo is right now, and we're introducing an MVP, and here are the levers that we're changing, and to be able to map that back to the actual patients and other maybe unorthodox stakeholders. They should be part of the standard design protocols, and they are now, but in the past, then not so much. To be able to map that back to them, that look at what your input has done to inform the success of this product. To be able to show that back to them and give them that feedback and say, look how valuable you are for this process. You are the missing link for this whole process. That helps them, that empowers them to help them realize, wow, maybe we're doing something special and we're changing the status quo.
Helen, do you have anything to add to this? Like, you are not a business owner, maybe, who want to have your solution in health and care sector, but
for me, it's a
specialist of the service design.
Yeah, for me, the answer is always like one, at least like in the field where I work at, and it's a little bit what you also talked about, which is like it's partnering up like with the right stakeholders, right? Like who carry the message. So the question is like, again, the same thing as I mentioned before, like if you want to make a change, you need to find the right partners who give the speed, the quality, like the impact, right? So these things, like how do you kind of like create in a short time frame, like the follower leader kind of like relationship in a sense. So it's finding the right stakeholders for me. It would be the key here.
Okay, I guess that this is a good note to actually to end this this session, because this is exactly what we are trying to do during this project. I have still one question, and I guess this is addressed to me. And the question is how to find the details of the open call for testing. And yes, this you can find in our social media, and or simply writing to me. And this is a great opportunity, maybe also to you, I don't know, to actually test your solution in real life environment here in Europe, in Finland and in Spain. So these are the two target countries. So I guess that that you will use the opportunity and bring out your solutions for testing. So thank you for listening, and hope to see you soon, because we have a lot of seminars happening during this project. So stay tuned. Thank you, and bye. Bye, Robert. Thank you.